with your hosts, Matty G, Skitty, and Malley for the Insight NBA Show.
G'day everyone and welcome to the Insight MBO mini-sode. It's like Bluey. We're not doing full episodes like Bluey now. We're just called mini-sodes because this is a trade package one. Malley, how are you, mate?
We've never been able to keep anything short in our lives, so let's see how mini we go.
Well, there's a few things that we're get short on, like a couple of things that. But look, let's just not talk about those right now because they might cause us to be a little bit sad and just prove that we can, unfortunately, be weak and males at sometimes. We are talking about a trade package. It is the best, worst kept secret in the NBA that Leon Rose wanted to bring Kentucky boy Karl Anthony Towns to the New York Knicks. Let me just start by saying, Malley, this hasn't happened previously, maybe because it wasn't as dire or as essential as it has become after the Mitchell Robinson injury and losing Isaiah Hartenstein. If we were in the time machine and Hartenstein was still there and Mitch Robinson was healthy, do you think this trade still happens?
Yeah, the hand was forced a little bit, wasn't it? You know, they were in a position where they had to get a centre. And, you know, they're obviously going balls to the wall this year. They're trying to win it all. So you can't really do that with the money that you've paid all these other guys and still hope to end up with a trophy. So, yeah, I think in that way it was inevitable. If Mitchell Robinson had stayed healthy, I mean, even if he started the season healthy, maybe it would be something different. But yeah, I just don't think that's who he is or will ever be.
You thought you had it at it's auspicious social media. I mean, Karl Anthony Towns putting out there the 3 dots. Mitch Robinson saying, like, it is what it is. I've got no comment. I'm like, of course you've got a comment. You were the starting center that he wasn't last year. It just feels like the chain is consistently being yanked on the career that is Mitchell Robinson. The guy can't stay healthy. And when he is healthy, the guy who's in there is playing really, really good basketball. See Hartenstein, the Oklahoma City Thunder starting center, in my opinion, this year, who has gone for the wide open spaces. Oklahoma. This is one of 2 musical references today. Oklahoma, it's the place to be. In a big trade package. So let's break it down real quickly for you. Malley, the Timberwolves are receiving Julius Randle and Donte DiVincenzo and a protected Detroit first-round pick and salary compensation. The Knicks are just straight up getting Karl Anthony Towns and his services. And the Hornets, they got frisky, which I love, by the way. The Hornets are just being there putting their hands up in the background, be like, hey, we'll take Daquan Jeffries. He's 28 years old, his peak, and we'll get some draft compensation because we're rebuilding and suck. They win the trade, as far as I'm concerned. They've done nothing apart from grab someone and grab draft picks for no reason. This is a competent Hornets move. What the fuck?
Yep. It's pretty strange to say, isn't it? But maybe this is a harbinger of better things to come for Charlotte this year.
Your initial thoughts on this? When it hit, we have before we get the hot takes, I guess the hot takes actually are our first thing. We decided to breathe on it, sleep on it, look at the numbers overnight, and then bring like an update of where we see them in our rankings because we've just done our big boards, Malley. My first immediate question to you is this. In your big draft board, where have the major players, and let's talk about the major players being the 3 key pieces, Karl Anthony Towns, Julius Randle, and Donte DiVincenzo. Let's call the collateral damage or the collateral fallout everyone else involved apart from those names. Up or down? Let's go from the top. Karl Anthony Towns. Don't give reasons. We'll get to that. We'll deep dive it. Karl Anthony Towns, up or down for you?
He's come up. Yeah, he's moved about 10 places up my board.
Julius Randle.
About the same. I think maybe 2 back. So nothing.
Fringe movements. A little bit of a nudge. Donte DiVincenzo.
Up, but only very marginally again.
See, that's an interesting one there. I think there's been I do have a sneaky sleeper ad, to be fair, in New York, and it's one guy who's filling a position that filled a position that existed actually more in 22, 23, saw some early rise in 23, 24, and I guess we'll get to that later on. When this broke, did you think it was a necessary trade for both teams? And winners, losers wise for basketball reality and basketball fantasy? You've said you're winners and losers just then, but winning basketball, what do you think impacts this season long-wise?
Well, I'll go back to your first comment, or your first question, which was, how did I feel initially? And I thought that everyone was a winner. Like, it seemed really good to me. I was like, I think everybody gets something out of this. It seemed maybe a bit to pay for Karl Anthony Towns. But, they're coming from a place of necessity, so they had to do what they had to do. And maybe, another team in a different situation obviously probably wouldn't have given up as much to get him. I think in reality, both teams, in the reality of NBA, outside of our scope here with fantasy basketball, I think they both are winners. And I think both teams in the fantasy lens are probably both winners as well. But there are losers. Someone's gain is somebody else's punishment in this case.
So I guess the rotating thing and moving pieces is this as well. I actually thought this was really, looking at a basketball lens, when you're successful, it's like there's a couple of adages here. Like necessity, it's the mother of invention. So therefore, New York necessarily had to invent a trade to create something to fill a need. It's like you see a need, fill a need. Thank you, robots. Classic DreamWorks film, just for throwing that one in there. But if you see a need, you fill a need. And immediately we know after Mitch Robinson went down. Now, you initially thought as well, I thought that we could see some Tibbs throwing out Randall as a small ball center this year. And that could literally hurt his value. And also we're talking about a guy last year who had can we just say it was a historically bad fantasy and basketball season to start. He was given away for cents on the dollar. I saw him in one league. It was a 10-team league where he was literally thrown out on the waiver wire. Someone was like, no, fuck this guy. I'm dropping him. No one wanted to, and this is, and you're a man who loves a trade. You would have been sniffing Julius Randle's behind like a dog in the dog park last year going, that's some bad value that will turn around soon enough. Malley, how many trades did you send out for Randle last year when he absolutely stunk up the place?
Yeah, I would have been on heat, mate. I would have been absolutely getting my nose into every crevice that I could. But yeah, no, I was definitely fishing for him. All I can think in my head is New York opening their email inbox to see who, they're trying to get a center in this dire situation. They're scrolling down. There's 14 emails from Dwight Howard. They've got to delete all those. And then they're like, what do we got else? And then they have another look, and then
Pat Beverly is emailed out of nowhere. Patrick Beverly is like, no, I can stop center. Do you need me, guys? I can come back to the NBA.
Yeah, and then DeMarcus Cousins would have been in there too, just like seeing what depending on what him, and obviously Isaiah Thomas would have been in there, being like, I'm a small ball five, the smallest ball five you could see. But yeah, I've just got here like. I think the first thing that I wanted to do once this trade went down was the first thing I thought, and I don't know what the first thing you thought from a fantasy position was, great, Karl Anthony Towns is going back to being a center, and his value was much higher when he was a center. Did you think similarly?
No. Yes and no. No is that Karl Anthony Towns, to be fair, and we've spoken about this off air, we try not to give all of our picks to each other and to everyone yet. We kind of save that for the last couple of weeks of the season when we see the preseason roll out, where we see what rotation minutes are like. But one of the guys on my radar earlier who I found had dropped in value and who proved he's on our injury show that's coming up, to be fair, as well. So we did have a Karl Anthony Towns injury year last year. So we are having a show. We put together a list of names of guys who were returning from sustained periods of absence last year. Karl Anthony Towns, to be fair, was one of those. And he was really good last year. They figured it out with Rudy Gobert. My immediate reaction was like, fuck, there goes my value on Karl Anthony Towns, because he had slid in drafts quite a lot. And I still find him a valuable and viable fantasy asset. Again, it's the shit bloke theory, I find, Malley, that sometimes comes into play. We don't like him as a person. We know that he talks too much. We know that he's got this ego and this attitude. Therefore, we associate that with a negative value in fantasy because we're weird like that. We don't see the statistical, goodness that these players can provide, and they can. And he was really good last year. I know that I had, for instance, in one league, I had a trade with him vetoed last year because it involved Karl Anthony Towns, and it was with Kawhi Leonard, who was healthy, and both of them beforehand were like, nope, done. And I'm like, no. And then I'm like, wait a second, are we then disregarding the value and the goodness that was Karl Anthony Towns last year? And he was a top 50 player. He finished the year around, I think, 45 to 40, like 45. So he was good. And I thought maybe this year he could improve that a little bit more. So that was my initial thoughts. My initial thoughts are, again, what the fuck is Minnesota doing? If it's not broke, don't fix it. They had a really, really good last year. I liked what they did on the court. I like how Karl Anthony Towns seemed to coalesce more easily with Rudy Gobert. That seemed to be the friction. And he was more readily available to defer himself. And so for a guy who finished 45th, 50, like let's say top 50, between 45 and 50 in fantasy last year, after missing as many games as he did, I thought he could push to top 35 to 40, like move that bracket down this year. And that was becoming a steal, as his ADP had suggested. He had dropped quite significantly. And in fact, looking back over the ADP radar of Yahoo for where Karl Anthony Towns had gone, he'd stuck around that 35 zone. He actually started at 37 and they ended up going at 35. So I thought he was about there. But because people were off him, I'd seen him in ESPN drop down. Obviously, their rankings are flawed. But that's my long-winded answer of saying the value was gone for Randall. For Cat in that way. He now moves into the top 25. Do you take him at the end of the second round conversation? Which really does shift a lot of dominoes.
I don't. And one of the reasons I don't, I see yesterday everyone was getting very excited. I went on and did some mock straight away after the news broke, and you could just see people being like, this is my 18th pick. And I'm like, I don't think so. Like, I'm not taking him in the first two rounds. And it's not because I don't think he's going to become dramatically better. He's going to be playing an extra 3 minutes a game. He's going back to center. His field goal should improve. He's going to hopefully be that 1-and-1 block and steals guy. But the thing that keeps my expectations pretty tempered is over the last 5 years, he's only been able to average 50 games. Like, that's one of the lowest in the league. Like, he's turning up to New York with the same body. Like, I don't know.
I'm going to stop you right there. I want people to check this right now, because this, for me, this is massive, because we just did a show that's, about the 13 factors. God, I wish I could just put up the slides just here. I might go back while I talk for a second and see if I've still got it in my downloads box from the other day. We just did a show about the 13 factors that we came up with where people could do. Here we go. I'm going to upload them. This is from the other day. I'm just going to bring them back up real quickly. The 13 factors about a player's fantasy value. I've got them right here. So these are the 13 things. You've got deep roster depth beyond 30, the trade potential. Well, that's happened. Getting blown out. The Knicks are really good. There's hype inflation on him now. So more of your purple boxes, you've got to go back and check this episode, are starting to be filled for Karl Anthony Towns. The next one was losing 1 minute. Well, we know he's going to gain a minute. His usage down, probably around the same-ish because Tibbs plays, but there's a lot of mouths to feed in New York. Recent injury. Yep. Big bump required. Yep. It's a big bump. New coach uncertainty. Well, it is a new coach for him, not necessarily for the team. Early shutdown, not really, but poor fantasy playoffs, we know that he struggled. So automatically, I've got to call you out. Your purple boxes now, those are your alarm bells for fantasy. More of them are ringing for you for Cat. It's only than anything else, especially under your monkey of hasn't played more than X amount of games in 5 years.
I think, even though he's going to potentially play 2 or 3 more minutes, I know that he isn't Isaiah Hartenstein. Like, that's two very different players. But what did Isaiah Hartenstein do out there? Absolutely nothing. So unless Tibbs is going to make a gigantic change in the way that he runs his team now, that he's got a center who demands the ball, who wants to take shots, who wants to be amongst it, not just doing the defensive work and kind of, filling the lane. I don't know. I'd say, if anything, Hartenstein's skill set is very similar. He probably moves the same sort of way. He's a guy who can hit threes. He'll get you a block and a steal a game. And I don't think that he really got a chance. Well, it's not that I don't think he didn't get a chance to do that in New York. And that's why I think a lot of people are extra high on him this year going to Oklahoma, because I think they think that he's going to be able to unlock a little of those abilities. So, yeah, I just think people have got they want a winner and a loser out of this. They want to fire Cat up the board and move him, 20 spots from where they have him and have him as a second round guy. And then they go, well, I'm moving someone up, so someone has to be punished out of this. So I'm going to jump the gun and move Randall down. Where realistically, yes, I've moved Cat up, as I said, maybe 10 spots. But I haven't really moved Randall a lot, and we'll get to Randall in a minute. But yeah, I feel like, people, are very reactive and they just want something to happen. So no matter what happens, they're jumping at their draft boards to be able to, move pieces around.
So I slept on it, like we said earlier on, and I didn't want to be overreactive, but I've kind of moved Randall down to 100-ish. Like, I really started thinking, I really have. Yeah, wait until you see my next. Yeah. I kind of, when we were talking, we said, let's save the takes. We only talked about Cat off air because we all know that I'm a Dante DiVincenzo truther. So anything that's good for Dante, I'm good for. And I've moved him up on my board. I see him as top 120, 100% now. Like, I've always had him around that zone, but it really consolidates that for me. I'm very curious to see where he goes because of their defense is so reliant on, I wouldn't say Randall's a great defender by any way, shape or form. Mm-hmm. And McDaniels is fantastic. So I look at their starting five, and this is what we kind of got to explore, the starting fives. And like you said, what happens now? Well, Randall, this is I think the most curious thing about this whole entire trade. Randall going opens up the opportunity for Hart to possibly be in the starters, which is great. So I think Josh Hart, he gets a significant bump from me straight away, because when I think about the opportunity, and again, it's about opportunity knocking for these teams, Josh Hart for me now has gone from someone who has been basically undrafted, and we've been in many, many drafts, Malley, where he is gone. I see him getting a bump. I see Mikal Bridges getting a bump. Now, Mikal Bridges was already starting to go off in ADP boards left, right, and center, and people were like, oh, he's going to be great in New York. He's going to be great in New York. He started off at 51.6 on Yahoo, and in recent drafting has been around the 53rd best player. So I think this kind of moves him more in line with that. People are really high on him. I was down on Mikal, but I do think basically we see Mikal Bridges becoming basically maybe a 50-ish player. In that, again, I do 5 block windows. It's like the first half of that round or the second half of that round. I base it off like 6 players, but I just say 5 as a rule of thumb to give it some leeway. So I think Mikal Bridges gets a bump, but Josh Hart, who has been basically undrafted how many times have you seen Josh Hart drafted in mocks this year, mate? To be fair?
Not a lot, which is wild because, he ended the season so well and people like to hold on to the last thing they saw.
Yeah, and the last thing they saw was goodness from him. I'm looking down the Yahoo ranks now. I literally cannot even see him on the list. People are like more into in those last sections, picking up guys like Obi Toppin or Wendell Carter Jr. or Nemhard. There's a little bit of action on him, but this is a guy who has been relatively undrafted. He now moves up as far as I'm concerned. If he does get the start, like we're saying, Hart is the biggest winner in fantasy. Hart is the biggest and most significant jumper in my board, because if you think about it, that's about 140 picks. So he jumps up about a 40 picks straight away, 3, 4, 5 rounds of value right there. So wherever he was from undrafted waiver wire territory, Josh Hart is the most and the biggest immediate winner in this one. My other sneaky one, like I said, was Miles McBride. I think this opens up so many minutes in New York for Deuce to fill in that need. We had the Emmanuel Quickley experience. That was the guy I was talking about who got traded last year. And Deuce, we know he had an absolute tear at some points. So I see that immediately. But I do see Randall getting the biggest blow. I definitely see a couple of rounds of value lost. I think I have him I moved him down into the late 80s in my initial thoughts. I haven't touched him again since I think 88, because I thought of Expo 88 in Brisbane, funnily enough. When I moved him down, I think I may have had him at 88. I haven't, let the dust settle where he is, but I just don't see the value that he has in that team. Whereas a guy I think like Dante DiVincenzo really does, if he gets a small forward role or more minutes, does get that role. What are your thoughts there? Because you were shocked when I said I've moved Randall down so far.
I shouldn't be shocked because you're not the only one I've seen do it. So, I think maybe my opinion isn't worth a grain of salt, but I'm going to try and defend it anyway. I think we're both in agreement with Kat. I think we know that his body is going to be his greatest weakness, but we're both happy to move him up a good amount of spots to probably a position where we're thinking about him end of the second round, going into the third round, as opposed to potentially the end of the third, start of the fourth. My thoughts with Randall is that I feel like I had him at about 68 before all this went down. That was where I was pretty happy with him. So just one of my last picks in the 60s. And I think a lot of people, when they're considering the impact that has occurred to Randall after this trade, they've compared it to Randall from last year, the last Randall that we saw playing. Whereas I'm trying to compare it to the Randall that we perceived was going to have to play some minutes at centre, the one who now has Mikal Bridges on his tail, and it's also a team that's gone in a different direction. As soon as Randall went out, it was Brunson's turn to be like, I'm the captain now, like the
look at me. I am the captain now.
I am the captain. So that's the situation that's unfolded. So I think if I was comparing him to 23, 24 round, definitely I would have moved him. He would have had a huge drop. But I think this is going to be a bit of a renaissance before he even got to have his downward climb. Like the writing on the wall wasn't looking good. The team was starting to move on. They're going in a different direction. He seemed like a bit of a dinosaur on that team. He wasn't an efficient scorer. The injury, which still may not be fixed, to his shoulder. But yeah, I really wanted to make sure that I was comparing the right Randall and moving Randall appropriately from that spot. So what I've got here is that I think for him as a person, he should be stoked, because I think he was going to get really embarrassed in the 5, 6, 7, 8 minutes that he was going to have to play centre, even more, obviously, with Mitchell gone. He's going to lose a couple of minutes under Finch, but maybe for the healing process for his body, that might be a good thing in the long run. Losing a minute or two each game might be saving him from losing 4 weeks halfway through your season, because we know that Tibbs likes to run his boys and run them hard. I'd say his usage improves. He would have had less usage with Brunson and Mikal than he is probably going to have with Ant Edwards. I see him on the Timberwolves team as the second offensive option. Like he's definitely over Gobert. That's not his strong suit. He's definitely over, what twin do they have? Jaden? Jasmine?
Jeremy?
What's the twins' name? Whatever one of the twins they have at small forward, he doesn't do anything besides defend. And an aging Conley, and Conley, not in any part of his recent career has he been a big offensive guy. He's the motor, he's the distributor, and that's probably another area that Randall suffers a little bit on, is that, he's not that go-to guy, because Brunson certainly wasn't your bog standard point guard, whereas Conley's about the definition of what a point guard is in the old sense. So, yeah, I honestly think that he still loses, but I don't think he's losing anymore. I think I moved him 4 spots.
Yeah, no, and look, it is Jaden, by the way. I just like to watch you go there and think about which. Yeah, I just like to watch you go through the different names of the different J's. And this is a team that doesn't have a Jalen on it, which is one of, I think, only 3 NBA teams, just statistically, with how many Jalens there are in the league right now. But it is also a team that does have Joe Ingles and Nickeil Alexander-Walker, just in case you wanted to know. Does it impact Ingles? Great. I think one of the interesting things is the Dillingham experience as well. He's a point guard, so he's still going to get those backup point guard minutes. Actually, I think they do have a Jalen on their roster. Wait, they do. I'm sure it's one of the JAYs, not one of the JALs. I think, I'm sure it's like Jalen Clark would. I think it's Jalen Clark. Can you check that for me? Just Google Jalen Clark while I speak. I think they actually do have a Jalen on their roster, because that's how deep the Jalen's are. I remember looking at their roster depth last night while I was having a look around. I was like, wait a second.
He's there. He's a guard. You're right.
They do. They do have a Jalen. There goes that bit of saucy.
Well played.
Which NBA teams do not have a Jalen? If anyone can put that in the DMs, that'd be great. But I think the other thing that we need to talk about, like you said, was that I think we've kind of covered it there, the Randall and the DiVincenzo impact. I think the Randall does get a bump down either way you look at it. The degree of that bump for some could be it. But again, for me, it's more severe than you. He does really become the second offensive option. Conley's a great distributor, a true point guard. The thing is that we know that Randall likes to do ISO. We know he likes to be the man. That's not going to happen in a place with Anthony Edwards, who I actually also see getting a bump because his usage, his offensive input. Now, that could hurt his field goal percentage quite a lot, but it could up his free throw percentage. We know he's a very good free throw shooter. But I do give Anthony Edwards a slight bump now as well, where I saw him mid-second roundish towards the end of the second round. I'm never as high on him as much as I love him as a player. I'm not one of these guys to even flirt with ever having him in a first round of drafts, Malley. I'm just like, Ant Edwards is not a first round player for me. Is he top 20? Yeah, he's around that. But now I actually see him around, I think when I put him down, I moved him to 20 in my draft board, and I was comfortable with that. I'm like, you know what? I'm going to give you top 20, but I'm going to give you the rarefied air of being the 20th person. I'm not going to be aggressively push you up my board that much there. I still think as well that guys like the peripheral guys that we see like Deuce McBride, they get a bit of a bump in New York. I definitely see a bump coming for, as you said, Josh Hart. He's the guy who could get the biggest step forward. I mean, for those who thought the Precious Achiuwa experience was going to be on as the getting a lot of center minutes, and we're thinking about picking up Precious Achiuwa, in that's just that dream is dead for you, and I'm sorry. But I think this is one of the things as well when we say we're looking at this, you need to get onto the big draft board that we have right now. We are going to move these guys around. Big draft board has your top 168 players, so basically 14 rounds of draftability from you, me, Skitty, and Matrix. Not only do you get all 4 of our draft boards with the ultimate version of that, you also then get the consensus board, which takes the aggregate averages of all of it, as well as a player reference page of over 220 teams. It is deep. It is full of action. So to recap, final thoughts. Let's go through Minnesota. Pieces here that are getting a bump. You think Randall? I think Randall down. Vincenzo, up or down for you?
Up, only because I think they need his three-point shooting, and that was something that he really showcased last year. So up, but not enough for me to be considering him. I don't think he jumps. I think he's right at the end of your 12-team choices if you don't want to roll the die on one of the rookies.
Yeah, like if you're around 120 and he's sitting there, you'd be comfortable with that. There's not a lot of upside unless there's an injury in town. Oh, heavens forbid someone like Ant Edwards gets injured, and he has to move into that starting shooting guard role straight away. Well, in that case, would be an absolutely massive hit. Don't see really any other major fantasy impact in Minnesota. For those guys, it's pretty much all set. Apart from Naz Reid, we do have to give credit where credit is due to Big Naz, who has been the 6th man or the 7th man, depending on what you want to call. He is a 6th man of the year candidate. He could get more minutes. He will stretch the floor a lot better than Randall. He's a better 3-point shooter than Randall, who is a career 33% 3-point shooter. It makes more sense for him to be out there. So we could see more minutes for him playing backup power forward as well as backup center minutes. So I do see getting a bump on Naz Reid around the 120 mark as well, around the same point for DiVincenzo. Agree, disagree for Big Naz?
I think so. And I think, the only other person I can think of, maybe it has a marginal effect in a positive way for Rudy. There's a reason that we play a 1 through 5, not a 1 through 3 and then 2 5s together. It's another. I think you're right. I think they learned well to coexist, and I think Minnesota should just run it back instead of pulling up the carpet and trying to make it work with Randall. That seemed a bit weird to me, but I think at the same time, he's going back to be out a bit more of Utah Rudy Gobert, where he's just out there being the only center. I think he was the center clearly, even if he was down as center and Cat was down as power forward. I think Cat was, at the end of the day, a center, and he was a center who was trying to be a power forward because he could stretch the floor a little bit. Maybe a marginal increase for Rudy, or maybe even if it's not even moving him on your board, that's one of those things where it comes to making a choice between him and Ayton or him and Miles.
Jarrett Allen.
It might be enough.
We did the Jarrett Allen versus Rudy the other night.
Yeah, true. So it might be enough to like sway your thought processes. And I've got the same there. Josh Hart, big winner. OG moving into power forward for New York. He's not really a post defender. He's more of a perimeter defender. Does that have an impact on maybe some of his defensive percentages or his ability to get his steals? I don't know. That floor is going to be stretched to the max. Like that's. Going to be really interesting to
That was the one guy who I did say the sneaky one was Miles McBride. I said there's another one. The other one was OG Anunoby. I think if anything, this is just such a massive coup for him. We know that it was a crowded lineup with the Nova Knicks, and it's a shame that we don't get to live the Nova Knicks experience, at least for one season, to see all these guys run together and see like a starting five lineup out there of not that they would, but just to see the five guys on the floor to take. Yeah. I just think that I actually reckon Tibbs would be down with taking the piss if they're up by like a certain margin in the fourth quarter for 1-2 minutes, just running out just as many Villanueva guys out there. That dream is obviously dead. But the great thing is it is OG Anunoby. So I think the big winner here is in New York, OG Anunoby. I haven't moved him as much up my board as Dante. Oh, sorry, not as Dante, as like someone like Dante DiVincenzo, who was undrafted in many leagues, as we said, or Josh Hart, sorry, who was undrafted in many leagues, because I've always thought OG was very valuable. I just thought he has slid back in drafts. Well, now I just see him going up. So I had him around the 60s, and I see him now as a 50. So there's like maybe 1.5 rounds of value. His bump isn't as significant as a Josh Hart, who was an undrafted asset. So Josh Hart isn't going to be a hot name. So he's a guy who you could get later and more fringy with to return you increased value, but that definitely buoys his stock in New York and solidify his minutes. But OG, I definitely see as a big, big winner in this one. Juice McBride, I think will get some minutes and some peripheral touches as well. Mikal Bridges, great for him. It's great for the New York Knicks. And just like they say in Hamilton, in New York, I don't know if you're a fan of the musical or not, but in New York, you can be a new man. And Cat can be a new man in New York. He can be back to a center, a starting center of all things, and return some of the value that we saw, maybe closer to his prime days if he has the availability and doesn't break down under the system of Tibbs. Malley, agree with that or any other disassociated things in there?
No, the only last comment I wanted to make was maybe, he's not much of a smiler at the best of times, but maybe OG is a little happier now too. He's come out and stated in the past that he wants to be a little bit more of a focal point on offense. And as soon as Mikal Bridges came in, I thought, well, there goes that. But now Randall's not.
They paid the man. They also paid the man. This has been brewing for a long time. Like these chips have just aligned ultimately perfectly for both of these teams.
I think they'll just be a bit more willing to let him do a bit more on offense as well. So maybe that also helps justify the small move that you're going to make with OG up your board.
Yeah, 100%. He sees a rise in my board as well. Deuce gets a rise. Josh Hart gets a little bit of a rise. Jalen Brunson, around where he is, but this consolidates his value. The touches that he would ultimately have to give up just to keep Julius happy, he doesn't have to. The other guys are all playing with their friends. Mikal, this really gets him a solid role in there as well without that timeshare. All that logjam at the power forward, small forward position and those small ball 5 minutes that we saw, and the dreams, as I said, of precious Chua fans out there, RIP to you and those hopes. They are dashed. Malley, thank you so much. Make sure you like and subscribe. Get the big draft board. Thanks to all our sponsors, including our good friends, Standard Squeeze. Use promo code IFS15 to get all of 15% off all of the items that are in your cart. Just go in there and just load up so many items and then use that code, because the more items you have in there, the more money you get off. That's exactly the right way you should think about spending your money. Malley, take care. Like and subscribe, guys. We'll catch you really soon. Take care.